Right, hello. My name is Pat, and I'd like to welcome you here today. And thank you for joining us for the Teatime Talks. And this one is called Uncovering Traces of Dublin's Past Through Old and Fading Signs. Teatime Talks is a series of talks inspired by the history and people of 14 Henrietta Street here in Dublin 1. And 14 Henrietta Street is a social history museum of Dublin life from one building's Georgian beginnings to tenement times. It is run by Dublin City Council Cultural Company, which runs cultural initiatives and buildings across the city with and for the people of Dublin. My name is Pat, and in a few moments I'm going to hand you over to today's speaker. But before we start, I want to let you know that there will be time for some questions at the end of this session. The question and answer button, Q&A button, is at the end of your screen. This talk is being recorded and will be shared with you at a later date. And if you want to find about our other projects and events, please sign up to our newsletter. Our speaker today is Emma Clarke. Emma runs the project Dublin's Ghost Signs. She has been documenting old signs and tracking Dublin's changing screenscape for almost as long as she's been living in Dublin. And without further ado, let me hand you over to Emma. Emma.
Thanks, Pat, and thanks everyone at 14 Henrietta Street for the opportunity to be here. So I'm going, as Pat mentioned, I'm here just to talk about my project, Dublin Ghost Signs, for the next 40 minutes or so. Okay, so just the outline of my talk this evening. After a brief introduction, I'm going to start talking about some of the stories behind some of Dublin's ghost signs. And while we're all familiar, I think, with the famous Finn's Hotel sign, I'm actually going to talk about some of the lesser known stories behind the signs that you see down laneways or signs that are so faded that you'd barely notice them on buildings. And as I talk about these stories, I'm also going to mention some of the salvage and restoration and reusing projects that I've worked on. And then just before I finish up, I'm going to talk about some of the mapping that I've done about Dublin's old signs. And I suppose just before I begin, I just wanted to say that this is a kind of this is a hobby for me, and it's like a personal interest project that I really enjoy, and I hope that I can kind of convey my passion for these old signs through this talk tonight. So I'd like to start by thinking back to a time when sign painting was a standard trade. It was like an industry or a service, as opposed to the kind of, the art form or the artistic thing that we think of today. And in these photographs, you can see some photos of sign painters at work in Dublin and in the US in the 1930s and 1940s. And before we had computer graphics and vinyl or plastic temporary signs, sign painters were drafted in for all types of work, from painting. They used to paint no parking signs on shutters, to advertising for businesses or products or films, as you can see in the picture on the left here. And one day a sign painter might be painting the letters of a sign on their local pub, and the next day they could be painting a gold leaf sign in the headquarters of a bank. So in the mid-20th century, sign painting was a fairly common job, and artisan sign painters would travel around painting signs in cities and smaller towns and rural areas. The definition of a ghost sign is an old and fading advertising painted on an exterior building wall, just like the ones that you see here. In some cities, you see examples of very large ghost signs, and they're often painted quite high up on the buildings, and they advertise things from local boot shops to flour to cigars or milk. So just to briefly introduce my project. So primarily Dublin Ghost Signs is a website, and it's a collection of photographs of old and fading signs in Dublin. And the collection includes the signs on our streets which still remain from businesses that have long since shut their doors. And as Pat mentioned, I became interested in ghost signs when I first moved to Dublin, as I found that they provided a glimpse of the city's past. And as I was trying to get to know the city, you know, it was a way for me to kind of connect with the city's past and its old stories. And as I mentioned, ghost signs, they're hand-painted signs on brick, like the two that you can see on this slide. They tend to often be faded and peeling due to their age. And there are quite a few in Dublin that are like these hand painted on walls. And I'm sure you'll recognize the Cummins and Son one straight away. It's located on Abbey Street, just across from the Abbey Theatre. But the other one might be you might be a bit less familiar with, because it's quite hidden away. And I just want you to, I'm going to come back to it later in the talk. So I just want you to think, have you come across this one before? Have you seen it, or does it look familiar to you? And can you think where it might be located? So in addition to documenting the hand-painted signs in Dublin, I also take photographs of other signs like stone-carved signs, threshold mosaics and doorways, fascia signs. And while the signs that you see on this slide don't fall under the traditional definition of what a ghost sign is, I feel that they still have significance to Dublin's past, and you know, they provide a window into that past. So I include them in my project for that reason. So just a bit more background. So I started the website in 2013, and but yeah, I had been taking photographs of signs since I moved to Dublin a few years before that. And it started out as a website to display the collection of photographs that I had built up. But in the past few years, the project has gained a nice community online, particularly on Instagram, but also on Twitter. Okay, so I'm going to move on and start taking a look at some of the signs, starting with this one. And you'll probably recognize this street in the photograph as Camden Street. And this sign is the homemade bread sign. And I don't know if you've ever noticed as you walk along Camden Street that there's this sign up here that's in the circle. And for ages, I was quite intrigued by this sign. It's very faded and weather worn, but you can still make out the signs, or the words, homemade bread and pastry. So the pastry is very faded down here. I hope you can see that. The slides it's probably quite small on the slides. But I reckon that this sign was painted about 100 years ago, and I'm going to tell you now how I figured that out. So it's really hard to make out, but in this photograph, the words, below the words homemade bread, there's a circular symbol, which you can see here. And that circular symbol is actually the Dante logo, which first started to be used in 1909. And it was kind of like a turn of the century version of the guaranteed Irish label that we have today, that you might be familiar with. And that's to show that goods are made in the country. And I just wanted to show you, I have a little pin on my cardigan. It's probably really hard to see, but it's the Dante logo, or badge, that I got from the Three Castles Burning website podcast. So anyway, yeah, so it shows that goods have been made in the country. And in this slide, I've done a kind of a very bad Photoshop job where I've overlaid the logo onto the sign, just so that you can see what it might have looked like. And even though my Photoshop skills aren't very good, hopefully you can get the picture from that. So I mentioned that this logo started to be used around 1909. So I figured that the sign must have been painted around then, give or take maybe 10 years. And sure enough, I did a bit of searching. So I'm a big fan of Tom's directory for looking up old businesses. And when I did a bit of searching, I found this entry in 1921 Tom's for the Irish Farm Produce Company. So I thought I was probably onto something when I saw the name, because I thought that it probably indicated that they were quite passionate about Irish produce. So I kept looking, and I found this newspaper ad from 1899. And although it wasn't an ad for the business on Camden Street, it showed that the Irish Farm Produce Company was also located on Henry Street and Upper Leeson Street. So I started to ask myself, who was the Mrs. J.W. Power that was mentioned in Tom's directory? And the name didn't ring a bell with me. I'm not actually from a history background, so it didn't initially ring a bell with me. But it turns out that Mrs. J.W. Power, it was Jenny Wise Power, who was a nationalist and feminist who grew up in Dublin. And she set up her first shop on Henry Street when she was just 21 years old. And in that shop, she only sold Irish produce. That's also where she opened a restaurant, which became a meeting place for revolutionaries in Dublin at the time. And throughout her life, she spoke out on women's issues and campaigned on women's issues. And she was a member of the Gaelic League and a founding member of Cumann na mBan in 1914. And this is a picture of the plaque outside that restaurant at number 21 Henry Street, where the Proclamation of the Republic was signed in April 1916. So she was quite involved in activities around that time. And she actually went on to become one of 4 women who was appointed to the first Seanad in 1922. So I just thought that, like, from this one faded sign, we're able to get a nice little kind of snapshot of a moment in Dublin's past that, maybe isn't as kind of well known as the traditional narrative around that time. So just to go back to Camden Street, this is the building which was home to that Irish Farm Produce Company. And if you think back to 100 years ago on Camden Street, it would have been, a really busy street with grocers, merchants, butchers, and so on. And if I could just draw your eyes down to this sign here at the bottom, Frank's. It might be a bit small on the screen, but until a couple of years ago, Frank's was the last remaining butcher on Camden Street, which recently reopened as a wine bar, which is also called Frank's. And what I thought was nice about this is that they reused the sign. So even though the butcher is gone, that little trace of the past still remains, which I think is really nice. So moving on to another piece of history in the city. So in this photograph, we can see, you might recognize it from number 15 College Green. There's this mosaic doorstep, which says Jose's Chambers. And again, I was really intrigued by this sign for quite a long time because, Jose wouldn't really be a common name in Ireland. So anyway, I went looking for information and found that it was actually a business which was owned by 2 brothers, John and Thomas Jose, and they were the proprietors of Jose and Co. manufacturing and dispensing chemists, wholesale druggists, oil and colour merchants, which is a really long name, but it was a well-known 19th century Dublin pharmaceutical company. And they had 3 different business premises. One was located on Dame Street, another on Arran Quay, which is also where they lived, and at College Green. And along with a team of chemists, the Josés prepared their own medicines, tonics, ointments, and pills for ailments like chilblains, sluggish liver, and flatulence and heartburn, as you can see from this advertisement from 1893. So I know the text is really small on that, but so the 1901 census tells us that the Josés were originally from County Mayo in the west of Ireland. And again, I just think that that name wouldn't be one that you'd typically associate with County Mayo, I suppose. But neither of them had married, and they were living at 38 Arran Quay, which, as I mentioned, was also the home of their warehouses, stores, and their laboratory. And the older brother, John José, died in 1905, and his younger brother took over the day-to-day running of the business until tragedy struck during the Easter Rising in 1916. And as Thomas walked home, from the business premises on College Green to his home on Arran Quay, one day during May 1916, he became caught up in the Troubles and was tragically shot and killed when he failed to hear an order which was shouted at him, and he failed to hear it because he was deaf. So I thought that was a really kind of sad end to the story. I went back to Tom's and had a look, and by 1921, José's Chambers was home to several new tenants, and it remains known by that name today. So, but that was kind of the end of the pharmaceutical business, I suppose. And then moving on, so I said I'd come back to the netball sign, and fair play to anyone now who recognised that as Harbour Court, which is a little narrow alleyway beside Wynn's Hotel, which is mainly, there's a little square there to show it. So it's mainly just used for deliveries. So I don't know if anyone has ventured down that little lane, but it was once home to Arco Amusements Arcade. And in this picture, I think you can see the wonderful lettering. It's, one of the only signs that I can think of. Yeah, one of the only signs that I can think of that you can get right up close to, so that you can see it at almost at eye level. And that's really rare. And I guess it's because one of the reasons that it survived this long is because it is quite hidden away and it's off the beaten track down this kind of dingy laneway, but it survived for quite a long time. So, so Arco Amusements got its name from its proprietor, who was called Alfonso Arcari. And back in 1955, Arco Amusements was the subject of a Garda Sting operation, would you believe? And you may have heard of a game called Skill Ball. Skill Ball used to be played in this amusement arcade. It's a game which involves placing a tray with various holes on a table, and each player chooses a number of coloured balls or marbles and takes turns rolling the marbles into the tray. And each hole on the tray has a different value, and the aim is to land your marble into the hole of the highest value. And people play together, and after all the marbles have been rolled, at the end the points are added up, and the one with the player with the highest points wins. Well, one evening in February 1955, a guard from Raheny Garda Station dressed up in plain clothes and arrived at Arco Amusements. And he bought 2 cards for 6pence. So all this information is in the news article about this. And the 2 cards for 6pence entitled him to 2 games of skill ball. And he noted that while he was there, he observed 32 games of skill ball being played that night, and concluded that Arco Amusements had created their own game of skill ball, in which it was nearly impossible to get one of the little marbles to stay in one of the little holes. So the following night, 2 more of his colleagues carried out a raid here and arrested Alfonso Arcari and 4 others, and threw the 56 people playing skill ball out onto the street. And eventually Arcari was found guilty of conducting the business of a common gaming house and was sentenced to 3 months in prison, which was later suspended, and a fine of £200 was imposed. And I tried to figure out how much £200 would be in 1955, £200, how much that would be in 2021. And I couldn't actually find the answer. So if anybody has the answer, I'd be interested to hear it, but I guess it's quite a lot. So anyway, if you find yourself in that part of town someday, and if you're with another person, it is kind of a bit of a dingy lane, you could pop down to see these Arco signs. And just to show, this is a picture of the lane. I actually don't have one myself, but this is a stock photo of the lane looking towards Abbey Street. And there's another one from the Ortiz Stills Library, and you can see the signs there on the side. Okay, so the next thing that I'd like to talk about is just, one of the unexpected directions that this project has taken me at times. And every so often people get in touch with me to say that, a sign has been uncovered somewhere, or maybe a building is due for demolition and that there's a sign on it. And, sometimes it comes about that we can actually salvage these signs. So back in 2019, you may have seen that moving on my slides, that this sign was uncovered on Store Street. And there was modern day advertising over the sign. And when it was taken down, this sign for Brothers Merchants was displayed. So I went to my old reliable Tom's directory again and found in 1932 that they listed McGowan Brothers iron, metal and machinery merchants at number 14 to 18 at Store Street. And I also found some newspaper ads like the one on the right from the Cork Examiner in 1918. So it has quite an old history, or long history in Dublin on Store Street. And of course, we're probably all aware that Store Street is located so just north of the River Liffey, and it's really close to Connolly Station. And the street was once part of Dublin Port, which I think makes it, a very interesting part of the city. And I love this photo. I'm not sure exactly when it was taken or where the image is from, but the site in the background is actually where Busaris is now. So I guess it's pre-1945. And just back to the sign, I think that given the sign's historic significance and its connection to the past of that area, and also that it was more aesthetically pleasing than these billboards which had been covering it, I got in touch with Dublin City Council and CIE, whose bridge it is. It's under the railway bridge, to make a case for preserving the sign, that sign in situ. But unfortunately, it was taken down over the St. Patrick's Bank Holiday weekend. So yeah, it was taken down and removed, but they did offer that I could take it away if I wanted to. So they moved it to a compound behind Connolly Station, where I was allowed to go in under cover of darkness one night at around 10 o'clock. And it took two of us over 3 hours to remove the nails from the board and to stack them on a roof rack to take them home. And these signs, they always end up being a lot bigger than you think that they're going to be when you take them down, and a lot dirtier in this case as well. So there was no way that these boards, that I could fit them inside the house, and I didn't want to leave them exposed outside to the elements. But a few months earlier, someone from Kells had got in touch with me to say that they were renovating an old convent and turning it into artist studios, and that they had a lot of space to store signs if ever I needed it, because it had happened previously that I had a sign that needed storage. So Kells actually, well, as we all know, has a long-standing connection with all things type related, given that it's got the connection that it's where the Book of Kells was created. And each year they have, they celebrate all things type related in a festival called Type Trail, which celebrates typography and print. And that's how this sign, the Brothers Merchant sign, ended up in County Meath, safely away from the elements, but unfortunately no longer in Dublin. And this sign went on display in a car sales showroom for 2 months in the summer in 2019, and it's in storage in Kells now. So that's where it's ended up, if anybody is ever looking for it. And yeah, I suppose just before I move on from that, I think that in Dublin we need to have a conversation about, you know, what we could do when signs like this are exposed. And, you know, this particular one had the potential to bring a sense of the history back to Store Street, you know, and link back to a time when the area was a thriving port, part of Dublin Port. And yeah, I just think it's a shame that it wasn't, that they didn't, that it wasn't kept there. And now that it's kind of moved out, it's in storage out in County Meath. And the last time I was down there, down around Store Street, nothing had gone up in its place. So that's 2 years now, just like this, which I guess is still kind of better than the billboards, the modern billboards, but we'll see. So anyway, just on a happier note, I just wanted to mention one of the restoration projects that I was involved with back before the pandemic. So I'm sure we're all familiar with the Screen Cinema, which was demolished back in 2019, but had been in this location on Hawkins Street from the 1960s. And on the west side, there was this hexagonal sign for the restaurant inside in the Screen Cinema. So you might have actually eaten there. It was called Metro Burger. And when I heard that the cinema was about to be torn down, I got in touch with the property company to see if we could do something about the sign, if we could save the sign. So they agreed that I could have the sign, provided it went somewhere that, you know, people could still enjoy it. So I got in touch with someone who owns a pub through Instagram. I got in touch with someone who has a pub beer garden up on Meath Street, and they said that they'd be willing to give the sign a home in the garden of the pub. And we went with a sign maker and a guy who restores signs, and we collected the sign from the building site one day and took it to the sign maker's studio. So when we got it there, when they were taking down the sign, the frame fell apart immediately. But the sign maker was able to make a new frame for it. And as we were or as he was restoring the sign, the question arose whether to restore the panels fully by kind of taking a print of the logo and reprinting them, or to simply preserve it as it is, or as it was in its weather-beaten condition. And as the paint was quite faded and would need to be repainted and recolored to properly refurbish the sign, we decided that ultimately, rather than washing off the existing logo and paintwork, that it would be better to just leave it as it was, which is kind of a bit shabby but still authentic. And this was the day that it was installed in that beer garden up on Meath Street in Lucky's. So we opted to go with fluorescent lighting, which means that the Metro Burger sign lights up in a similar way to how it would have lit up when it was hanging on the side of the Screen Cinema. And it was, well, up until the pubs all closed, it would light up, like in the fourth picture here, it would light up every night in Lucky's. And just to please maybe think about visiting the Metro Burger sign when the pubs reopen. But it was great to give it a new lease of life. So finally, just before I wrap up, I'd just like to talk about some of the mapping that I've done using story maps. So back in 2019, before the pandemic, I had a series where I created story maps, which are kind of narrative maps that allow you to tell a story through space. And using the story maps, you can combine images and video or audio with a story to create a nice kind of interactive experience. And there are many tools out there for mapping, but I use an open source one, which is called storymap.js. So this is kind of how it looked on the website. So every week I would create a different story map focusing on a different street in the city every week. And how I do it is I combine archival photographs with my own photographs. So I kind of take a look at the streets, how they look now versus how they looked, you know, in older photographs. And in particular, I use a lot of images from the Dublin City Library and Archive collections, which you might be familiar with. And the picture on the screen here is one of those, a lovely photo of Capel Street. Which I then combine with my own photographs from Capel Street. So like this one of Walsh's, which was uncovered a couple of years ago when a restaurant was refurbishing this building at number 159 Capel Street. So that sign was on display for a short while. And ultimately moved into the restaurant, and since then the restaurant that has actually closed down. So I don't actually know what happened to that Walsh's sign, whether it stayed in the restaurant for the next tenant or what happened to it, not sure. So this is another one of the story maps that I did of North King Street. Again, with another photograph from Dublin City Library and Archive of North King Street at night. Just this is how it looks on the Dublin City Library website. And that was taken in 1970. So it's just a nice kind of to look at the streets as they used to be. And another example of one of the story maps is one that I created for Bloomsday. So obviously in Ulysses, Joyce mentions so many different people and places and locations, and some of those locations are actually still visible on the streets today. So I wanted to create a map which brought all of these traces together. So each little bubble on the map here represents a quote from Ulysses, and each one mentions a different place or business, and I've kind of put in an image for each one. So for an example is this one of Lundyfoot's, which was a tobacconist and snuff factory on Parliament Street. And if you look up when you're on Parliament Street, you might spot the LF and Co, which stands for Lundyfoot and Co. And then here you can see the excerpt that mentions that from Ulysses. So it's quite nice. And the map moves. So up here you can see the map moves as you click through the images, so that you know where the different locations are in relation to each other. So yeah, just if you do fancy doing some virtual wandering around the streets of Dublin while we're in lockdown, maybe the city centre is outside your 5K, then you can pop over to the website and they're all available there to flick through. And then just finally, before I wrap up, I just want to mention what's happening this year with the project. So I was really delighted to be one of 3 recipients of the Digital Repository of Ireland's Community Archive Scheme for 2021. And this means that the images from the Dublin Ghost Signs collection will be deposited in the Digital Repository, or the DRI. And it means that they'll be preserved digitally for generations to come. So the DRI does long-term preservation of cultural heritage data for Ireland. So it's just really great for the project to know that if the website crashes or goes down or something, that that the images will still be available for people to see online. And just, before I wrap up, these are on Twitter. The project is Dublin Ghost Sign, and on Instagram it's Dublin Ghost Signs, and all the kind of progress updates about the collaboration with the DRI will be posted on the social media. So I have that. Just my final slide is a few of the resources that I mentioned in the talk. And that's it. Yeah.
Okay, that was absolutely fantastic. I enjoyed every minute. Selfishly, actually, I enjoyed everything. And we'll find out what the other people here have to say. The question here is, what's the significance of the money sign on each of Tom's entries? Have you noticed that? A money sign?
I have noticed it, and I'm not 100% sure. I assume that it's the rent that they paid, maybe, or the rates that they were paying, but I'm not 100% sure of that.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And somebody says, my favorite ghost sign is Goffs on Mount Street, which reappeared during building some years ago, and 1886. And of course, we still have Goffs today down in Kildare. What's there? Other questions? Let's see, where else? I've got to open them all. It compliments again. I want to commend them on our project. Great ideas. Obviously, that a hobby has become a passion. Hopefully, others will be inspired to do something similar. Thank you very much for that. Pure fascination. Absolutely wonderful. Go to a question. It's just all praise. Emma, I'm envious. Emma, what a great talk. Now, this is the question. Finally, a question. Okay, we've run out of praise, thankfully. Or we'd never get you out the door. What's your favourite sign in Dublin?
Oh, my favourite sign is, I should have put a photograph into the presentation. It's, if you know, when you're coming down North Great George's Street, as you're walking down that street, right at the bottom, there's a sign that's the well-known boot and shoe retailer, and I've looked around. I've done all my usual places, Tom's and various other places, and I've never actually found any information about it. So it's a bit of a mystery. It's still a mystery, and I think that's probably why it's one of my favorites.
Brilliant. And the response here, money in Tom's entries refers to the rateable valuation of each building. So, and for your information, €200 or £200 in 1955 is worth, this is incredible, this is some fine, €6,108.
Wow, that was a lot.
That
But
was a lot of,
he avoided 3 months in jail, I suppose. So if he had it, he probably had it from all the
he
illegal
must have had
gambling
like,
that he was
I mean,
running.
they wouldn't find him unless they had it, right, somebody wants to know, do you know where the metal man from the Metropole is? Oh, that was the statue that stood outside, the man, the usher, that stood outside the screen cinema.
Oh yeah, he went into the Savoy cinema on O'Connell Street. I think he's in the lobby of the Savoy now. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Could have listened all night.
Thanks.
Are there any street signs that you've just talked about one, but any other street signs that you located that you can't find any information about?
Trying to think now. One that I haven't really found any information about is the brush factory on. Do you know that one, Pat? It's off Foley Street there.
Yeah.
Just again down by Connolly Station, and it says that it's a brush manufacturer's. But I never found any information about them, like in the news, say the way that I found something about the Arco Amusements. But I guess in a way, these signs are, they're the signs that are for just normal businesses, so they didn't necessarily make the papers. I know that the Arco Amusements did because of the gambling, but generally I suppose they just belonged to people who were just going about their daily business. So it's probably not surprising that there's no that I can't find the information.
It could be sweeping brushes, paint brushes that part of machines, from where it's located. I've passed that way a number of times, and I've always been looking to see if the door is open so I can get a look in. If even I could smell, if you could smell engine oil or something, you might get some idea. But unfortunately, that's not happening.
They've shut up shop.
Yeah, that's signs outside Dublin, and also the oldest sign you've found. So outside Dublin.
Well, as you can probably hear, I'm from Cork, so there's lots of really nice ghost signs in Cork as well. Actually, lots to do with the breweries and things up around. If anyone is familiar with Cork, up around Shandon, and I've noticed a few, like in the other cities around Ireland, like Galway, Limerick would have quite a few old signs. But where I don't notice them that often is, when you'd be driving through villages, you'd expect sometimes to see, maybe on the side of a pub or something that you'd see something. And I think a lot of those have disappeared over time. So I'd love to go exploring more of the kind of rural areas in Ireland and see what's out there. I think that would be a really nice project to visit different towns.
Certainly,
kind of the hand painted signs, like the old shop fronts obviously are still visible in lots of towns, but I haven't noticed that many of the hand painted ghost signs in those. And what was the
oldest one? This the oldest one you've come across?
Yeah, so the pub, the Sackville Lounge there on Sackville Street, I think, just off O'Connell Street down the side of Cleary's. Yeah, Sackville Place, that's it. So I was in the Sackville pub one night a few years ago, and they had the back door open into the laneway there. And when I was coming down the stairs, I spotted some really faded writing on the wall outside in the laneway. So I went out and had a look and took a few pictures, but couldn't really make it out. But I was talking to another ghost sign enthusiast, Antonia Hart, who wrote Ghost Signs of Dublin, the book. And we managed to figure out that it was a sign for Hoyt and Son, I think it was. They were based on Sackville Street in prior to the 1916 Rising, and they were chemists again, and they sold oil paint and things. And the sign had actually been painted over in kind of blue, but it was still visible underneath. So I think that was destroyed in the 1916 Rising. So the sign predates that because it was never rebuilt, as far as I know. So I think that's probably the oldest one that I can kind of pinpoint that it's older than 1916. But it still survives. And I think the reason why it survives is, again, because it's down a lane and it's kind of covered by a staircase. And, they're the ones that tend to persevere.
You have an invitation here to go down to Limerick to catalogue the old signs. Could I just say to people, you go around, and if you don't take a photograph or an image there and then, by the time you go back the next day, these things have usually gone. So if you're going around town, take out your phone. If you have a camera, will you take your photograph thing? Somebody said they love the News and Brothers signs on Pearse Street. I was very surprised recently where I saw with News and Brothers livery. Great talk. So News and Brothers, they used to be chemists, was it, or chemical suppliers down on Pearse Street? They have a very elaborate sign. It's sort of like done in ceramic.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah,
I can't recall now. I think they might have been coal merchants, but I could be wrong about that now. But I think they were down around there. Yeah, no, it's a fabulous sign. So hopefully that one stays there. It's kind of in the kind of the wasteland of Pearse Street, isn't it?
When I was a kid, Pearse Street was a lively street, but it's been killed. There used to be butcher shops and all sorts of shops. But it's nice. But you've also got, there's a shop there that just over the skylight over the door, fanlight over the door. It says Brunswick Chambers, referring back to the old Brunswick Street South. Do ghost signs have to be older than a certain decade to be termed a ghost sign?
I'm not aware if there's any kind of definition on time like that. But generally they do tend to be, from decades ago, like you wouldn't necessarily say that, a shop that opened in the last 10 years, say. But I'm not aware if there's any definite time frame on them.
Now, there's a woman from Kells, absolutely fantastic. Great to see the connection between the ghost signs and the Kells. Are there any ghost signs of scale in the Irish language that you're aware of?
There are, because I have a section on the website that are, I'm trying to recall if there's any of the actual painted ghost signs, but there's definitely old shop signs that are in Irish, and I'm drawing a blank now when I'm trying to recall it, but there's a whole section on the site that are Irish language signs.
Okay,
sorry, so now I can't remember off the top of my head.
Bit of overvalue for somebody there now. You can go out and you know where to check it. So we know that it's out there. It's just
DublinGhostSigns.com.
Again, your favourite sign outside of Dublin. Do you have a favourite sign outside Dublin?
I do. Probably be in Cork again. There's an old jeweller's sign on North Main Street in Cork. And what I really like about it is, it's hand painted on the front of the building quite high up. But what's really nice about it is, as you look down a laneway, it's kind of perfectly framed by the laneway. And I just love when there's little things like that, that people made great use out of. The different views, like, they placed it exactly where you could see it from kind of 2 streets back from Grand Parade. So I think, that would probably be one that comes to mind outside of Dublin.
And the signs on large walls, how do they go about that? I mean, not so much here, but I presume abroad, but there are some, the likes the Cummins one that you were shown there in Abbey Street, and Finn's Hotel there in Leinster Street, is it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a good story from the US back in the 1930s when sign painters who used to paint those really high up signs like that you'd see in New York and things really high up on the building, they were actually known as wall dogs, and the reason why they were known as wall dogs was because they used to tie themselves onto something on the building, or maybe they had scaffolding, and they used to just, it was like a leash for a dog, and they used to just run up and kind of hang in there, I suppose, and
Wow.
paint the signs. The other reason I think why they're called wall dogs is that they used to work like dogs as well when they were painting the signs, and they were out in all weathers and getting lashed on and things. So yeah, I guess that's how they did it on the really high buildings.
Mm.
Yeah,
It says a lot for the quality of the paint, actually, that they've actually lasted so long. Especially in American cities where they such extremes of weather, that
mhm,
the paint is actually, and the work has lasted that long. And
yeah,
somebody is contacts and say, we might be interested to know that Dublin City Council Conservation Section are grant funding the repair of the Why Go Bald sign there in
oh,
Dame Lane off Dame Street, and
brilliant.
the Happy Ring House, that's McDowell's in O'Connell Street. You know that one
I
thing
do,
that
yeah.
where
I actually rang them up a while back because I was checking if the sign actually still works or if it still lights up, and they were telling me that they are hoping to get it repaired. So that's really good to hear that that's going to be repaired.
well,
And
it's they thank you very much. I mean that you've actually that's you that created the awareness of all this, so that's a lot of that things that happen that you don't even know about. That's that response to what you were doing.
mm,
You know,
yeah, great.
uh,
Just thinking about the paint that you were mentioning there, about that there was so much lead in the paint, and it was so
of
kind of
course, yeah,
different to the paints that they use now. But interestingly, do you know the Hector Gray sign that used to be there on
yeah.
Liffey Street as you were looking down Liffey Street? The building has been demolished now, but before it was demolished, it was painted over with some advertising, and when it was painted over, you couldn't see the Hector Gray sign, but after a while, some of the words that were there on the Hector Gray sign were showing through the paint, because I guess the newer paint didn't have all the lead in it. So there was a guy on the advertisement, and on his jacket it said pipes, and you could see the Hector Gray coming through on the sign. So I thought that was nice that even though the signs were painted over, they were still able to come through just because of that really old paint that they used.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting. And are there any controversials apart from the Anglo-Irish sign that was there in Stephen's Green? Are there any controversial ghost signs around that you be aware of?
Um, I'm not sure. I think one of the more controversial things is when they get painted over, to be honest,
Mm.
or the people who kind of like, yeah, kind of paint over them and don't maybe realize the significance, um the historical significance or what they might mean for people. I'm not sure if I can think of. Oh, actually, I can think of one which was on one of my slides early on, the Apollo House sign. I don't know if you remember
Mm.
that protest a few years ago, and the 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 people who were in Apollo House that time involved with the protest, they actually took the sign down kind of as a memento. So I don't know if
Wow.
you'd say that that's controversial. The building was, kind of torn down anyway. But I think that ended up, can't remember now, but that ended up somewhere. So that's in
Well,
one of the
it's probably
museums, I think, now. So
somewhere. So,
so that's it. Yeah, that's a bit controversial, I suppose.
listen, again, I want to thank you again. It's been absolutely fantastic. You've received huge amount of praise for the talk here today. Your delivery was absolutely fantastic. It certainly set
Thank
us
you.
off on a new course, a new path in life. Like, you know, I certainly be going around town looking for all these ghost signs now. So just to thank you all. Thank you again, Emma. Thank you all for participating. And we'll finish up now for this evening. Thank you.